Hello everyone out there on the interwebs. My name is James Murwa. Welcome to episode 44 of the Writing Africa podcast. Writing Africa is a project that celebrates writers of African descent, be it on the continent or in the diaspora. This week's focus is on Kenya's first recognized female playwright and novelist, Rebeka Njau. Enjoy! Please remember that you can support our project on Patreon, PayPal, Ko-fi, or mobile money. And you can get information on how to do that at writingafrica.com/donate. We aren't just a podcast, but also a website that covers the African literary scene at writingafrica.com. Since our last episode, we've had news on the OCM Booker's Prize being handed out in Trinidad and Tobago, the Kenyan Bookstore Textbook Center handing out penmanship awards as part of their 60th anniversary celebrations. The Pulitzer Prize was handed out in the US earlier in this week. Our friends at the Island Prize for a debut novel from Africa, the shortlist was announced, and a lot more has been happening. So go to writingafrica.com, that's updated every weekday, and you'll find a lot more information than just this which I've talked about. Let's talk about this week's focus, Rebeka Njau. Ms. Njau wrote novels, poems, short stories, plays, non-fiction, and she was a pioneer in the representation of African women in literature. A little bit about her, because I know you've never heard of her, or if you've heard of her, I'm really impressed. She was born on 15th December 1932 as Rebeka Njau. She was raised by Christian parents who were very, very strict on Christianity. They rejected traditional Kikuyu beliefs and practices. Young Rebeka maintained a close relationship with her maternal grandfather, who instilled respect for indigenous spirituality. She was one of the first 14 girls admitted to Alliance Girls High School in 1949. She did a 2-year course there, and then out of those 14, only 3 of them, including her, went to the Alliance High School for boys for additional 2 years. From there, she went to Makerere University College in Kampala and obtained a diploma for education in 1958. She returned to Kenya after graduation to teach at Alliance High School for girls, and then she was instrumental as a co-founder of the Nairobi Girls School. You will know it as Moi Nairobi Girls. That was set up in 1964. So you can see that she's actually been instrumental in the education system in Kenya, and she's been doing a lot in that space. In 1959, she married Rebeka Njau, and she dropped the name Nyanjenga, and she became Rebeka Njau. And she did a lot of work in the art spaces. Rebeka Njau is an artist from Tanzania. So the two of them set up the Kibo Art Gallery in Tanzania, the Paya Gallery in Kenya. They had 2 kids and separated in 1983. So that's a bit about who she is. So now let's talk about how writing itself. She appears in the African literary space as one of only 2 women, alongside Grace Ogot, who attend the African Writers' Conference in Makerere in 1962. This conference will always come up when you're talking about the beginning of modern African literature, because many of the names of the people who you know heard about, those guys, a lot of them, the first platform they were given was the African Writers' Conference, and they formed a community, and that's what became a thing going forward. So she was one of 2 women alongside Grace Ogot. From that conference, she would go on to produce a lot of work. She wrote plays like The Scar, A Tragedy in One Act, 1963, and In the Round Chain, 1964. She wrote novels like Ripples in the Pool, 1975, and The Sacred Seed, 2003. She wrote the short story collection The Hypocrite and Other Stories, 1977. She wrote the non-fiction title Kenyan Women Heroes and Their Mystical Power, 1984. And then in 2019, she gave us her memoir, Mirrors of My Life. One of her poems was edited by Langston Hughes in Poems from Black Africa in 1963, and she also contributed to the Heinemann Book of African Poetry in 1995. So yes, this is an accomplished writer. She's produced work in many different genres, and we need to be talking about this woman a lot more. Of course, her most famous title was Ripples in the Pool. It started as a manuscript, Alone with the Fig Tree, which won the East African Novel Competition in 1964. It took a long time of substantial reviews before it was published 9 years later by Trans-Africa Press in 1975. Unfortunately for her, Trans-Africa went bankrupt after publishing. Ms. Njau then spoke to her friends at Heinemann, and it was republished in 1978 as number 203 in the Heinemann Africa Writer Series. You know the Heinemann African Writer Series. If you don't, please Google. And of course, when you're in the Heinemann African Writer Series, everybody knows you across the continent. There was some translation of her work in Dutch, which was published in 1988. And it was extracted for Daughters of Africa, which was the first Daughters of Africa, which is edited by Margaret Busby. Let's look at this novel a little more. It tells the story of Selina, a sex worker, a prostitute, living in the city who is a modern independent woman. She decides to marry Gekere, her younger lover, and they move to his village. They have a pregnancy and Selina miscarries, and Gekere's mother, who already doesn't respect her, seeing as she was older than her son, she calls her an infertile witch. So Gekere tries to assert his authority over his wife by beating her up. And as she becomes more isolated, Selina turns her sexual desires towards Gekere's younger sister, Gashiro. She then experiences a mental breakdown and tries to hang herself before strangling Gashiro in her sleep. It ends with Selina as a stray woman, in quotes, wandering the countryside. I read this book when it was republished. It was republished in 2024, and there was a huge launch in Nairobi. The publisher is House of Zeus. A new generation of readers were introduced to this book. It looks at newly independent Kenya with a brilliant analytical eye for someone who's at the forefront of a new literary epoch. People like Rebeka Njau didn't have African women writers who she could look at and say, this is how it works. She was basically setting the foundation for how it works. On a macro level, if you're reading it now, you can see it's a conversation between the brilliant but timid hospital assistant Gekere, and that's a lot of the people who are coming out of the new Kenya. People who they're very qualified, but they're timid, they're scared, they don't want to shake things up. And on the other side, we have, a brash politician, Munene. He actually was a criminal before independence, and now he's wormed his way into the system, and now he's calling the shots. And you're seeing the battle, between those guys who are qualified, they're scared, they don't want to shake things up, and the people with the loudest voice, they're the worst type of people. And, we're trying to say who's going to win in this battle. Ladies and gentlemen, politician with braggadocio won. Sitting here in 2025, that politician and his system won. It's horrible, but this is where we are. The characters, especially the women characters in this novel, are fully human. No caricatures of what one believes a woman should look like, think, or act. They portray the full range of emotions from rage, joy, fear, terror, and everything in between, reacting to actions from people of all genders. Men who are terrors and women who are victims is not the central driving narrative force at the core here. This is about people who are surviving a colonial system that does horrible things to individuals and society. This is about people surviving and how what things were done to them and how they've survived. In fact, it was interesting to me that the Mau Mau rebellion was not the center. Though it was mentioned, but it was about the place where people are and how they were trying to survive the past 10, 15 years. Selina has a sexual relationship with Gekere's sister Gashiro. Probably the first instance of lesbian action in a novel written by somebody with a Kenyan nationality. That is revolutionary. We don't see that. I mean, we've seen it now. Years later, we've seen it in different spaces, in different books. I suspect this is the first time it's happened